When the room shifted, Keanu looked at Sandra, and everything changed. Do you know the exact moment when a calm room suddenly feels electric? Do you know the feeling when two people walk in together, and every heart starts beating faster? Do you know how a single shared glance can silence an entire crowd without a word on that day? Inside the largest studio of the network's headquarters, something unusual happened the second Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock stepped onto the live stage. It was not chaos, but it was close. People felt something in the air, something warm, something heavy, something impossible to ignore. Every person watching from home felt it too, even if they could not explain it. The energy was gentle, but it was powerful. It was almost like the room itself understood that something meaningful was about to happen. For the audience, it felt like witnessing a long-delayed moment between two souls who had silently carried respect for each other for many years. The cameras were already rolling. The red lights were already glowing, and the host was already giving the introduction. But none of that mattered because the viewers at home were not looking at the host. They were looking at Keanu, who had walked just a little behind Sandra as if he wanted her to take the spotlight first. And they were looking at Sandra, who kept glancing back at him with a small, nervous smile that she rarely showed in public. It was a smile that revealed both excitement and fear, as if she knew something important might happen that day. The moment they sat on the couch, the crowd leaned forward. The atmosphere felt thick with expectation. People could sense that this was not a regular press interview, not a routine movie promotion, not a staged moment. Something real was simmering underneath their calm expressions, and the world could feel it. Keanu sat with a kind of humble stillness that made people feel safe. Sandra sat with a kind of quiet strength that made people feel understood. Together, they created a balance that felt almost spiritual. Even the host paused for a second longer than usual, sensing the shift but not fully understanding it. The show had just begun, and yet it already felt like history. As the opening applause faded, Sandra noticed something odd. Keanu kept adjusting his sleeve on his left arm, a subtle movement he only did when he was nervous. She had seen him do that years ago during the filming of their first project together. She remembered how he used to do it before difficult scenes, especially emotional ones. She tilted her head slightly, watching him carefully, and he caught the look. For a moment, they shared a silent conversation that only the two of them understood. The audience did not know the words, but they felt the connection. The host began with a cheerful question, asking them about the new movie they were promoting. Sandra tried to respond, but halfway through her answer, a loud cheer came from the back row of the crowd. It was not disrespectful. It was almost emotional, as if the audience member could not contain themselves. Sandra laughed softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. Keanu smiled too, and he touched her shoulder gently, encouraging her to continue. The touch was small and brief, but it sent the entire crowd into a quiet wave of murmurs. Viewers at home replayed the moment instantly. It felt natural. It felt honest. It felt like something deeper was hidden within that gesture. Sandra tried to focus on the conversation, but her mind wandered back to a memory she had buried. She remembered the first time she worked with Keanu. She remembered how he treated everyone with kindness, even when he was exhausted. She remembered how he carried her lines for her when she forgot them. She remembered how he helped her during a difficult emotional period, even when he barely knew her. She remembered how he asked nothing in return. And now, sitting beside him after so many years, those memories pressed on her chest like a quiet heartbeat. Keanu, on the other hand, was observing Sandra closely. He always respected her strength, her discipline, her ability to make everyone around her feel included. But that day, he noticed something else. She looked tired, but not physically tired. She looked emotionally tired, as if something unspoken had been weighing on her for a long time. He watched her hands, slightly trembling when she thought no one was looking. He watched her take small breaths, almost like she was preparing herself for something difficult. Keanu had always been intuitive, especially with people he cared about. And he could feel a shift in Sandra the moment she walked onto the stage. The host moved on to the next question. It was a light-hearted one, asking them about a scene in the movie where they had to improvise. The audience laughed as the clip played behind them, showing them joking around on set. Sandra laughed too, covering her mouth as she always did when she genuinely found something funny. Keanu looked at her instead of the screen, because he always preferred real moments over recorded ones. When she caught him looking, her laughter softened. She gave him a small nod as if saying thank you for making this moment easier. But then something shifted. The host suddenly leaned forward with a curious expression. He said he had received a surprising message earlier that morning from someone who had worked with Keanu and Sandra in the past. The crowd went silent instantly. Sandra's smile froze. Keanu straightened his back slightly, as if preparing for impact. The host said the message contained something emotional, something honest, something that touched him deeply. He said that the person who sent the message insisted that it be shared live because they believed this was the right time for both Keanu and Sandra to hear it. The air in the room became still. Keanu looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at the host. The audience waited with breath held. And then the host read the first line. The message said, "I watched both of them carry the weight of other people's expectations for years, but I also watched them protect each other quietly when no one else noticed." Sandra blinked fast. Keanu's jaw tightened. The crowd gasped. The host continued reading. The message said that Keanu and Sandra had once helped a crew member who was struggling with a personal crisis, even though neither of them wanted credit. It said that the crew member had never forgotten their kindness. It said that their compassion had changed someone's life forever. It said that their bond, whatever it truly was, had always been built on mutual respect and silent understanding. The room felt heavier with every sentence. Sandra looked down at her hands. Her breath became uneven. Keanu turned toward her slightly, noticing the shift in her posture. He wanted to reach for her hand, but he hesitated because they were live, and he did not want to overwhelm her. Still, the desire to comfort her pressed hard on his chest. He leaned closer, whispering something so soft only Sandra heard it. Whatever he said made her eyes glisten instantly. The host paused, sensing the emotional weight in the air. He asked Sandra if she wanted to respond. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice cracked. She had not expected to be caught so off guard. She had not expected her past kindness to return to her in such a powerful way. She had not expected the world to see this vulnerable part of her. Keanu placed his hand gently on her back, offering silent support. The crowd reacted with a mix of gasps and soft, emotional murmurs. The moment felt intimate but respectful. It felt like something greater than a simple television interview. It felt like the beginning of a deeper truth. Sandra finally took a breath, preparing to speak. Her lips parted. Before she could say a single word, the stage lights flickered. The crew looked confused. The cameras froze for a second. The host leaned back, startled. The audience shifted nervously, and Sandra's expression changed completely. Because she realized something that would change everything, and that is where part one ends. The moment the stage lights flickered, the entire room fell into an uneasy silence. People thought it was a technical issue, but Sandra felt something very different. She felt a familiar pressure growing in her chest, the same pressure she used to feel during moments of emotional overload. Years earlier, during difficult times in her life, she had learned to recognize this physical signal. It meant that her mind was holding back something heavy, something she refused to acknowledge for too long. The flicker of the lights only triggered it faster, because it came right after hearing the message that exposed her hidden kindness. The moment felt too raw, too overwhelming, and too close to the truth she had been avoiding. Keanu saw her shift in posture. He noticed her shoulders tighten, her hands curl lightly in her lap, her breathing become shallow. He knew her well enough to understand that she was fighting something inside. He leaned slightly closer, trying not to draw attention, and whispered a quiet question. Sandra shook her head gently, trying to steady herself. She did not want the world to see her unravel, especially not live, especially not in front of Keanu, especially not on a day that was supposed to be simple and controlled. The host raised his eyebrows, trying to keep the show moving. He glanced toward the technicians, waiting for a signal that everything was fine. The lights steadied again, but the mood had already changed. The viewers at home sensed the tension. The live audience felt a strange mixture of suspense and tenderness. It was as if everyone collectively knew that something deeper than entertainment was unfolding before them. The host cleared his throat and asked Sandra once more if she wanted to respond to the message. Sandra lifted her eyes slowly, her gaze soft yet heavy. She tried to speak, but her voice refused to move. She felt tears building behind her eyes, not from sadness, but from a mixture of gratitude, exhaustion, and the frightening realization that she could not hide her emotions anymore. She had spent so many years managing her feelings in front of the world, keeping her private pain tucked away behind her professionalism. But in that moment, the world saw her vulnerability in real time, and she felt exposed in a way she had not expected. Keanu sensed her tension rising again. He gently moved his hand toward hers, stopping right before touching it, giving her the choice. Sandra saw the gesture out of the corner of her eye. The kindness in it, the respect in it, the patience in it, made her swallow hard. She placed her hand on his, not tightly, not dramatically, but with a soft acceptance that surprised them both. The audience gasped quietly. The connection felt warm, grounding, and honest. The host looked at them with wide eyes, unsure whether to continue the planned questions or let them speak naturally. Before he could decide, Sandra inhaled deeply and finally found her voice. She spoke slowly, her words trembling but sincere. She said that when she first worked with Keanu many years ago, she walked onto the set feeling scared and unsure of herself. She said she had been dealing with personal struggles she never told anyone about, and she had felt the weight of expectations pressing hard on her. But then she met someone who treated everyone with equal kindness, someone who never made her feel small, someone who always created a safe environment for others. She paused, her eyes glistening. The room remained perfectly silent. Sandra said that kindness was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was not showy. Real kindness lived in small actions that most people never saw. She said that the message the host had read brought back memories she had pushed aside. Memories of how she was supported during a difficult time by someone who never took credit for it. She glanced at Keanu when she said it, her expression softening despite the tears threatening to fall. Keanu listened quietly, absorbing each word. He did not smile. He did not react dramatically. He simply looked at her with a calm warmth, the kind of warmth that held no judgment. The audience watched in silence, sensing that Sandra was revealing something she had never said publicly. The host leaned forward, realizing that this moment could not be interrupted by planned questions or commercial breaks. But just as Sandra was about to continue, something unexpected happened. The crowd section near the front suddenly erupted in a whispering buzz. A few audience members pointed toward the corner of the stage, confused and slightly alarmed. The cameras reacted instantly, trying to capture the movement. Sandra and Keanu turned to look, their eyes narrowing as they tried to understand what was happening. The host looked toward the producers, who seemed equally confused. One of the assistants rushed toward the stage, holding a small tablet with a message on the screen. She handed it to the host with trembling hands. The host's face changed the moment he read it. His eyes widened, then softened, then widened again. He looked up at Keanu and Sandra, his voice suddenly low and careful. He said the message came from someone unexpected, someone who insisted it had to be delivered immediately, even though the show was live. The host's voice cracked slightly as he said the sender's name silently to himself. Sandra recognized the look on his face instantly. She had seen that look before, during moments when people had to share something delicate, something emotional, something not meant for the public but pushed into the open anyway. Keanu leaned in, asking who the message was from. The host hesitated, breathing slowly. The audience waited, holding their breath again. The room felt like it was tilting forward. Finally, the host looked at Sandra, then at Keanu, then back at the screen. He said the message was from a person neither of them had spoken to in years. A person connected to a moment in their past that both of them avoided discussing. A person who claimed that the truth they had been hiding, the truth they had both tried to protect, was finally about to come out. The host took a breath and read the first line. And the moment he did, Sandra froze completely. Because the message said, "I know what happened between the two of you that night and the world deserves to hear it." The room erupted into shocked gasps. Sandra's hand tightened around Keanu's. Keanu's expression changed instantly. And the truth they thought they had buried was suddenly cracking wide open. The message that reopened a door they both kept closed when the host finished reading that single line. The entire studio fell into a silence that felt almost physical. Even the cameras, which usually hummed softly, seemed to dim their presence. Sandra sat completely still, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. Keanu looked at the host with a calm expression, but his eyes darkened just slightly, the way they did when he sensed something delicate, something dangerous, something that needed careful handling. The host cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. He looked as if he regretted reading the message aloud, but he also knew he had no choice. It had come from someone who insisted it was urgent, someone who had access to the show's private communication channels, someone who clearly understood that this moment would shake the room. The host hesitated before speaking again, giving Sandra and Keanu a few more seconds to process the shock. Sandra's heart was beating painfully fast. She knew exactly which night the message was referring to. She had not talked about it in years, not even in interviews, not even during personal conversations. It was a night that changed her, a night that hurt her, a night that healed her, a night she never expected to face again. She swallowed hard, trying to push the memories back, but they rushed into her mind with impossible force. Keanu noticed her subtle panic. He leaned slightly toward her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He asked her if she wanted to step out for a moment, but Sandra shook her head. She did not want to appear fragile. She did not want to run away from something that was part of her story, even if facing it frightened her. Still, the tremor in her hand gave away her fear, and Keanu gently wrapped his fingers around hers. The touch was grounding. The audience watched the gesture with quiet astonishment. The host exhaled and looked down at the tablet again. He explained that the sender of the message had written more, and that the rest of the message might offer clarity. Sandra's stomach tightened. She knew clarity was the last thing she wanted right now. Clarity meant revisiting a memory she kept locked up for years. Clarity meant the world would hear a truth she never intended to share. Clarity meant stepping into vulnerability she had spent a long time avoiding. Keanu nodded to the host, giving him permission to continue. Sandra closed her eyes for a brief moment, preparing herself. The crowd leaned forward, caught between emotional curiosity and deep respect. The host began to read. The message said, "That night changed both of them in ways they will never admit. They were two people carrying heavy pain, and they found comfort in each other's presence when the world expected them to be strong." The audience gasped softly. Sandra opened her eyes, blinking rapidly as tears threatened again. She remembered that night clearly. She remembered the exhaustion after filming. She remembered the overwhelming pressure she felt from her personal life, from the media, from everything. And she remembered Keanu standing beside her in a quiet hallway, offering her a moment of peace without needing anything in return. The host continued reading. "I saw Sandra break down quietly when she thought no one was watching. I saw Keanu walk toward her without hesitation. I saw how gently he spoke to her, how he helped her breathe again when she could not catch her breath. I saw the way he protected her even from her own fears." Sandra lowered her head. She tried to inhale, but her chest tightened. She had never wanted that moment to be public. She had never wanted the world to know she had cried that night, not because she was ashamed of vulnerability, but because it had been a moment of trust. A moment she shared only with Keanu. A moment she believed would remain just between them. Keanu took a slow breath, remembering the same night. He remembered Sandra leaning against the wall, trembling quietly, trying to hold herself together. He remembered walking up to her, placing his hand gently on her arm, guiding her to sit so she could breathe easier. He remembered how she apologized for crying, and how he told her she never needed to apologize for being human. He remembered the softness of her voice when she finally thanked him. The host's voice grew softer as he read the next lines. "That night, they talked for hours. They shared stories they never shared with anyone else. They saw the rawest parts of each other. It was not romantic, and it was not dramatic. It was simply two people finding safety in a moment of weakness. But that night created a bond they never acknowledged publicly." The studio felt like a different world now, quiet and heavy, filled with a strange kind of reverence. Some audience members wiped their eyes. Others held their breath. Sandra and Keanu both stared at the floor, lost in their memories, lost in a night that shaped more than either of them ever admitted. The host paused again and then said there was one final line in the message. He said the sender insisted it be read aloud. Sandra felt her heart drop. She could feel her palms growing sweaty. Keanu straightened his posture slightly, preparing for whatever came next. The host took a deep breath and read the last line slowly, almost reluctantly. "But what they do not know is that someone else was there too, watching them, hearing them, and holding a truth that neither of them saw coming." The audience reacted instantly, whispering loudly, confused and shocked. Sandra lifted her head sharply, her eyes wide and frightened. Keanu turned his head toward the host, his expression shifting into something focused and protective. The host looked up from the tablet. Before he could say another word, a voice from the back of the studio shouted, "I was the one there that night." Everyone turned. A figure stepped forward through the light. Sandra's face went pale. Keanu slowly rose from the couch. The moment the voice echoed from the back of the studio, every head in the room turned at once. For a second, the light seemed brighter, the air seemed heavier, and the silence felt almost painful. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. Keanu stood slowly, not out of fear, but out of instinct. His posture changed in a way the audience had never seen on live television. He became still, sharp, and protective, the way someone becomes when they sense that a fragile truth is about to surface. The figure stepped forward through the narrow space between the audience rows. The cameras swayed instinctively, trying to capture the moment from multiple angles. The viewers at home watched with a tension that pushed them closer to their screens. The host froze, unsure whether to welcome the person or stop them. The producers behind the glass reacted with confused gestures, unsure if this was planned or accidental. But the person kept walking, steady and deliberate. Sandra's eyes softened in recognition even before the figure reached the stage. She whispered a name under her breath, a name she had not spoken in years. Keanu looked at her quickly, noticing the tremor in her voice. He had never seen her react this quickly, this vulnerably. Whatever connection she had with the person approaching was clearly deep, emotional, and complicated. The figure stopped near the foot of the stage, pausing for a moment as if gathering courage. The audience leaned forward. The host cleared his throat nervously, trying to regain control of the show. But the figure lifted a hand gently, signaling that they only needed a few seconds. The quiet authority in that gesture made the host fall silent again. Then the person finally stepped into the full light, revealing a face that carried both age and memory. It was someone Sandra and Keanu had worked with during one of the most emotionally challenging films of their career. A person who had been present behind the scenes, unnoticed by the world, but essential to their journey. A person who had witnessed the night the message referred to. A person Sandra once trusted deeply, but lost touch with after life grew heavy and busy. The figure spoke with a voice that trembled slightly, but it carried years of honesty. They said they were the one who found Sandra sitting alone in the hallway that night. They said they were the one who saw her struggling to breathe, overwhelmed by something she never talked about. They said they stepped away quietly when they saw Keanu approach her with gentle calmness, because they realized he was the one person who could help her in that moment. Sandra closed her eyes as the memories grew sharper. She felt the same tightness in her chest, the same emotional pressure she felt that night. She remembered how lost she had been, how frightened she was of becoming a burden, how ashamed she felt for breaking down. She remembered telling herself that she had to stay strong for everyone, even when she was falling apart inside. And she remembered Keanu's voice guiding her out of that storm. The figure continued speaking, their voice growing steadier as they settled into the moment. They said they kept the memory of that night to themselves for many years, not out of secrecy, but out of respect. They said they never wanted to expose Sandra or Keanu. They said they only reached out today because they believed the world should understand the depth of the kindness that passed between them. They believed people needed to hear about compassion instead of conflict, about humanity instead of drama. Sandra swallowed hard, emotions rising in her. She felt gratitude, fear, and confusion all tangled together. She appreciated the intention behind the message, but she also felt exposed. She was not used to the world seeing the fragile pieces of her heart. She preferred to keep those private. She preferred to be strong in public, even if she was trembling inside. Keanu stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Sandra and the moment without blocking her view. He kept his posture calm, but his presence radiated protection. He asked the figure gently why they chose today, out of all days, to bring this truth forward. His voice held no anger, only curiosity and a quiet concern. The figure's answer was simple but heavy. They said they had seen the clip of Sandra struggling earlier in the interview. They said they recognized the same emotional strain they saw in her years ago. They said they felt it was time for the world to understand why her strength mattered so much. They said they did not want her to carry the weight of her past alone anymore. The audience absorbed every word. Some wiped tears. Some pressed their hands to their chests. The room felt strangely intimate, even though millions were watching from home. Sandra finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She told the figure she remembered that night vividly, and she remembered how alone she felt until Keanu showed up. She said she appreciated the intention behind sharing the truth, but she also admitted she felt overwhelmed. She admitted she was afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of turning a private moment into a spectacle, afraid of reopening wounds she thought were closed. Keanu turned to her gently, his expression calm. He told her she had nothing to be afraid of. He reminded her that vulnerability was not weakness. He reminded her that the people watching loved her not just for her strength, but for her humanity. His words were quiet, but they carried more power than anything said on the show that day. The figure looked relieved, grateful that Sandra understood their intention. But then, almost as an afterthought, they added something unexpected. They said that the message they sent earlier was not the full story. They said there were details Sandra and Keanu did not know about that night, details they had kept hidden for years. The host's eyebrows shot up. The audience murmured again. Sandra looked confused. Keanu looked cautious. The figure took a slow breath and confessed that someone else had been there that night too, someone neither of them noticed, someone who had walked away before Keanu arrived, someone who was connected to Sandra in a way she did not yet understand. Sandra frowned, her heart skipping a beat. Keanu tilted his head slightly, sensing the tension rising again. The figure hesitated, then said the name. But the microphones crackled at the exact moment the name left their lips. The audience leaned forward desperately, trying to hear it. Sandra's eyes widened, her breath stopping midair. Keanu's entire expression changed. The host asked them to repeat the name. The figure tried again, and the studio lights went out. Complete darkness. A collective gasp filled the room. In the dark, every truth feels louder when the studio lights went out. The entire room erupted into a wave of startled breaths and urgent murmurs. People instinctively reached for their phones, for each other, for something solid in the sudden darkness. The cameras froze. The host stood up from his chair, confused and tense. The audience whispered wildly, unsure if this was a technical failure or something more unsettling. But in the middle of that pitch-black chaos, there were two people who stayed perfectly still. Sandra Bullock felt her heart pounding so loud it echoed like a drum inside her chest. She could not see Keanu, but she could feel his presence beside her, steady and grounding, like an anchor dropped in a violent storm. She reached out slowly, her fingers searching through the dark. Keanu gently met her hand halfway, his palm warm, his touch calm. He squeezed her hand lightly to let her know he was there, that she was safe, that whatever was coming next, she would not face it alone. The audience could not see their hands meet, but they felt the shift in the room. It was the kind of connection that did not need light to be visible. It carried weight, sincerity, and quiet strength. Even in darkness, it felt like the world was watching something intimate and deeply human. The host raised his voice, trying to sound confident, announcing that the team was already working to restore power. But even he could not hide the tremble beneath his words. The timing of the blackout was too sharp, too sudden, too perfectly aligned with the revelation that was about to come. The room felt charged, not just with electricity, but with tension that wrapped around every person like an invisible thread. Sandra took a slow breath, trying to steady her pulse. In the darkness, memories of that old night returned even sharper. She remembered feeling lost. She remembered being alone in a dim hallway with her fears. She remembered not noticing how many people had seen her break down. And now, years later, the same darkness pressed around her, bringing back old emotions she had fought so hard to bury. Keanu leaned closer, his voice low and steady. He told her to breathe slowly, to focus on the present moment, to let the darkness settle around her instead of inside her. His voice was like a warm blanket, soothing and protective. Sandra exhaled shakily, grateful for the calm he carried so naturally. The figure who had stepped forward earlier, the one who claimed to know the truth, remained silent in the dark for a long moment. When they finally spoke, their voice sounded even heavier, as if the darkness itself had wrapped around their words. They said the blackout changed nothing. They said the truth still needed to be told. They said the name Sandra needed to hear could no longer stay hidden. The audience gasped again, their eyes straining uselessly in the dark. Every person in the room felt the weight of the moment. It was strange how darkness made every sound sharper, every breath louder, every heartbeat more noticeable. Sandra tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She asked, barely above a whisper, who the other person was, the one who had been there that night without her knowing. She asked the figure to repeat the name. She needed to hear it. She needed to understand what part of her past was suddenly coming back. Before the figure answered, the lights flickered weakly, casting pale shadows across the room for a few seconds before going dark again. The momentary glow revealed Sandra's trembling expression, Keanu's protective stance, and the figure's tense posture. When darkness swallowed the room again, the figure spoke. They said the person who had been there that night was someone Sandra had loved deeply. Not romantically, not dramatically, but in a way that shaped her sense of trust and safety. Someone whose presence always brought comfort. Someone she believed had never seen her vulnerable. Sandra's breath caught. She knew only one person who fit that description. Only one person whose opinion mattered to her in such a profound way. Only one person whose presence during her moment of weakness would have changed everything. Keanu could feel the shift in her hand. He whispered her name, trying to anchor her again. But Sandra's mind was already racing through years of memories, trying to piece together the truth she never suspected existed. Then the figure took a deep breath, and said something that made Sandra's entire body go still. They said the person who had witnessed that night was not just someone she loved, but someone she believed she had disappointed years later, someone she felt she had failed, someone whose absence had created a silent ache in her life. The host, even in the dark, leaned forward anxiously. He asked the figure to say the name clearly. The figure inhaled slowly, and then in the absolute darkness, the name came out. Sandra gasped so loud the entire room heard it. Keanu whispered, "Oh no!" And the moment the figure finished saying the name, the lights snapped on. Every eye flew immediately to Sandra. Her face was pale, her hands shook. Her eyes filled instantly with tears, because the name she had just heard was one she had never expected to face again. And in the front row of the audience, the person was standing, looking directly at her. The person in the front row and the truth Sandra carried for years. When the lights snapped back on, the shock in the studio felt like a wave that washed over every person present. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even blinked. The air felt thick, almost too heavy to breathe. Every camera pointed directly at Sandra, but her eyes were not on the lens. Her gaze was locked on the figure standing in the front row, the person whose name had been spoken in the darkness, the person she never expected to see again. Her breath trembled as she whispered their name, barely audible but marked with disbelief, fear, longing, and something deeper that she had carried quietly for years. She felt the entire world watching her reaction, watching her struggle to understand how this moment had found her after such a long time. Her heart felt like it was beating in every part of her body at once. Keanu, still standing beside her, followed the direction of her gaze and understood instantly who the person was. He had seen the look in her eyes before, years ago on set, when she talked about this person with a mixture of gratitude and regret. The person stepped forward slowly, as if unsure whether they even had the right to approach. They moved with a quiet hesitation, the kind that only appeared when old emotions still lingered, when past wounds had not healed properly, when time had created distance but not closure. Their expression was soft, not angry, not accusing, but filled with a kind of tenderness that made Sandra's chest tighten painfully. It was a face she once trusted deeply, a face she once leaned on during difficult days, a face she had missed silently even when she never said so out loud. The audience watched with breathless curiosity. They could sense the depth of the moment without understanding the history behind it. The host looked completely stunned, unsure whether to intervene or allow the scene to unfold naturally. But no one dared to interrupt, because the energy in the room felt sacred, like something that had been waiting years to surface. Sandra finally managed to speak, her voice cracking softly. She asked the person why they had come. She asked how long they had been there. She asked why they never reached out all these years. Her words stumbled out in a tangled rush, raw and honest, carrying a weight she had never allowed to show in public. She had always been composed, always strong, always steady. But now she stood exposed in front of millions, unable to hide the emotional shock crashing through her. The person stepped closer to the stage, their voice gentle and steady. They said they came because they saw the live broadcast earlier in the day. They said they recognized the same pain Sandra once carried years ago, the same heaviness that pulled at her shoulders, the same fear that lived quietly behind her smile. They said they had stayed away for a long time because they believed she no longer needed them, that she had grown stronger, that she had moved on. They said they did not want to reopen old wounds or become a reminder of difficult memories. But then they heard what happened on the show, the message, the reveal, the trembling in Sandra's voice, and they realized something painfully simple. They still cared. They cared enough to come, even if it meant stepping into the spotlight they had always avoided. They cared enough to face their own fears just to make sure she knew she was not alone. Sandra's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed to be emotional in front of the world. But the person shook their head softly, reminding her that it was okay to feel, that it was okay to be human. Their voice remained calm, steady, honest. They said they had been there that night years ago in the hallway, just before Keanu arrived. They said they had seen Sandra collapse into herself under the pressure of everything she was carrying. They said they had walked away only because they believed she needed privacy, not because they did not care. Keanu stepped slightly aside but stayed within reach. He knew this moment belonged to Sandra, but he refused to leave her emotional space. He understood the depth of the connection unfolding before him, and he respected it without question. He had always been the silent guardian in moments like this, the steady presence who offered strength without demanding attention. Sandra glanced at him briefly, her eyes showing gratitude stronger than words. The person reached the edge of the stage and stopped, unsure if stepping up would be too much. Sandra hesitated for a moment, her heart torn between past and present, between pain and healing. Then she took a slow step forward, closing the distance. The audience watched as she moved carefully, with fear but also with hope. When she reached the edge, she extended her hand. The person took it gently, as if touching something fragile. The contact broke something open inside Sandra. She felt years of unspoken emotions rise in her chest. Regret for the distance, gratitude for the memories, pain for the unsaid words, and relief that this moment was finally happening. She whispered an apology, something small but heavy, something she had carried for years. The person squeezed her hand gently and told her there was nothing to forgive. They told her life had simply moved too fast, and both of them had gotten lost in the noise of their own journeys. Keanu watched the moment with quiet understanding. He knew how much this meant to Sandra. He knew this was a wound she had never fully addressed. He also knew that healing often came in the most unexpected ways, during moments people never planned, during times when truth finally found its way to the surface. The figure who had sent the earlier message stepped back, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. They watched with soft relief, knowing they had done what they believed was right. The host, sensing the depth of the scene, remained silent, allowing the cameras to capture something rare, genuine human healing happening live. Sandra breathed deeply, her voice steadier now. She told the person she had always believed she disappointed them. She told them she regretted letting distance grow, even if life became overwhelming. The person smiled softly and told her she had never disappointed them, not once. They said she had been going through more than anyone knew, and they admired her strength even when she felt weak. Hearing those words loosened something heavy inside Sandra's chest. It felt like exhaling a weight she had carried for years. Keanu stepped closer again, placing a gentle hand on Sandra's back. His touch was subtle but comforting. He reminded her that she was allowed to lean on others, that she did not need to carry everything alone. Sandra nodded, tears still glistening but no longer from fear. They were tears of release, of closing a chapter she never knew how to revisit until now. The person in the front row asked if they could speak honestly. Sandra nodded. They said the reason they came forward today was not to expose her, but to tell her something they should have said years ago. Something that might change how she saw that night forever. They said that when they saw her break down years ago, they realized how deeply she cared for everyone around her, how much she carried silently, how hard she tried to stay strong for others. They said that moment helped them understand her in a deeper way, helped them realize how rare her heart truly was. They told her they never forgot it. They told her it changed how they treated people afterward. They told her vulnerability had made them kinder too. Sandra's lips parted in quiet surprise. She had always believed that night was something she should hide, something that made her look weak. Hearing that it had inspired kindness in someone else made her feel lighter, stronger, and more whole. Keanu smiled softly at her reaction. He had always known the truth. Sandra's strength had never come from pretending she was fine. Her strength lived in her compassion, her honesty, her willingness to keep going even when the world asked too much of her. The studio audience rose slowly to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was gentle, respectful, emotional. It felt like a wave of support wrapping around Sandra, Keanu, and the person who had just stepped forward with such honesty. Sandra wiped her face again, but this time she smiled through the tears. She squeezed the person's hand once more before stepping back toward Keanu. He placed an arm around her shoulders without hesitation. She leaned into him just slightly, not heavily, not dramatically, but with a quiet trust the world could feel through the screen. The host finally spoke, his voice softer than before. He said that sometimes the most important stories were the ones people carried silently for years, waiting for the right moment to be understood. He said that today was one of those moments. Sandra looked at Keanu, then at the person in the front row, then at the audience watching with open hearts. She finally spoke with a steady breath. She said that life had taught her something simple but powerful. The truth always finds gentle ways to return, especially when healing is ready to begin. The show went quiet. The cameras zoomed in. Keanu whispered something into her ear that made her smile softly, a smile filled with relief and hope. And for the first time in a long time, Sandra felt whole again. The lights warmed, the audience softened, and the truth that had once frightened her now felt like freedom. The story ended not with drama but with healing. and the world witnessed it.